Okay, good afternoon. I think we're ready to start. So welcome. This is the second to last session of the AI in Real Life seminar series. Next week we're going to have Eric Colson from Stitch Fix to sort of close the quarter. That's been great for us here in ICME to have you all coming for the seminar. I hope that this was a good experience, and we look forward to hearing from you in terms of comments and whatnot to any of the organizers here. But today I'm very pleased and honored to introduce the speakers for today. As you can see, we have a special arrangements today, another conversation. And our guests are Joaquin Candela, who is the head of machine learning at Facebook, and to drive the conversation and to ask questions, we have Esteban Arcaute, who is Facebook as well, and he's leading the data science and analytics there. And Esteban is one of our own. He's an ICME product from 2010, a PhD from ICME, and has been a great friend of ICME for a long time, so we're very, very pleased to have him here. And without further ado, I just want to mention that if you are interested in asking a question, we'll pass around little papers you can write on. If you just raise your hand, and we'll make sure that you get a card, and we can pose questions towards the end of the session. And so, without further ado, thank you very much for being here. Hopefully, they will also explain us the T-shirts that they have afterwards at the end. So, with that, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Gianluca. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. It's really a pleasure to be here back on campus, and really looking forward to hearing your questions, and hopefully we'll give you some interesting answers. So, Joaquin, you joined Facebook in 2012?
That's right.
So can you tell us roughly how the use of AI has changed over that period of time?
Yeah, and I might give you a longer answer than you paid for. The other thing is I want to share a disclaimer, which is that I built and supported the applied machine learning team, which explains the T-shirt I'm wearing, for the past 6 years or so. But I no longer support that team. I still feel like it's a member of the family. I'm working on a new thing that has to do with the ethics of AI, so I'll be able to say a few words about that. But I feel that I can still talk about AML since I created it and grew it. All right, so when I joined Facebook in 2012, I joined a very small team that was focused on using ML to make sure that the ads people saw were as relevant as possible and as not annoying as possible, right? And when you do that and you come from having been a researcher at Microsoft Research as I was, the temptation is to take only a machine learning lens when you look at the problem. But what I very, very quickly realized is that we weren't gated on the richness or complexity of the models we were using. We actually were gated on scale and speed, right? So I became obsessed with this idea that wizards don't scale, right? So you can hire a couple of ML experts, and then you put them in a company, and then you say, hey, here's like a few hundreds or maybe thousands of ML prediction tasks for you to solve. Good luck, right? So I became obsessed with this idea that what we needed to do was to massively accelerate the speed of experimentation, right? And this is not only true of ML. You could think of any other discipline like chemistry or biology, where if you can increase the number of experiments you can run per day or per week by 3 or 4 orders of magnitude, you're going to move a lot faster. And then the other part was, well, now I have a model that looks like it could work or make a difference, right? How quickly can I test it, right, in production, right? So you're also going to make sure that deployment speed is as fast as possible, right? And then finally, that when you deploy something to production, if you have to revert because it's not working as intended, that you can do that as quickly as possible. So over the past 6 years, we built a unified machine learning platform at Facebook, which runs 100% of the machine learning applications that power all products. And to give you an idea of the scale, actually maybe I'll solicit some guesses and you guys can shout. It's going to be great. How many machine learning predictions do you think are run at Facebook every day? Anyone? 100 million. 700 million. Billion, 700 billion. 42, that's right. That's right. All right, I'll stop here because I'm not sure this process would converge. Like, I don't know whether it would converge or whether it would diverge. Okay, it's 200 trillion. That's the answer. And you can do the math yourselves if you want. It's not that hard, right? You have, let's just reason in terms of orders of magnitude, right? You have like well over 1 billion people who are active on, on the family of products. Maybe between 1 and 2 billion, doesn't matter. Order of magnitude 1 billion, right? And people may use, any of the products tens or maybe hundreds of times, that order of magnitude per day, right? And then every time they use a product, you have to solve a lot of problems, right? One of the problems is to detect stuff that shouldn't be on any of the products, like inappropriate content or offensive or harmful content. Another huge one is you very often have order of thousands of new pieces of content you could be exposed to, and the order in which you see them is going to have a huge impact on your experience. And once you start multiplying all these numbers together, you realize that you get to the hundreds of trillions very quickly. I'm actually going to pause here and let you dig deeper into any aspect that you think I should dive deeper into.
So can you tell us how the adoption of AI by engineers happened, and roughly, can you give us some numbers about that?
Yeah, it's actually a funny story because when I was in the ads team, I never dreamt that we would actually be able to unify all ML use cases onto one single platform. And the reason why that felt so important was that if you really want to make the funnel from ideas to experiments to actually launching stuff to production as big and fast as possible, you have to think about building, like an amazing experimentation log or logging system that anyone can consult. So right now we have a place where you can see what experiment anyone in the company has run, right? Whether it's a natural language processing, computer vision, speech recognition, applications for VR, whatever, right? And today, over 1 in 4 engineers in the company are active users of the platform we've built, which is actually 100% of the people who spend time using AI, either as creators, and the creators are the wizards. You don't have that many, and you don't need that many. And actually, if you go try hire people who can develop new AI models, you'll be in trouble because there aren't that many, unfortunately. But the good news is that you don't have to be, because if you can understand AI as a component of a system, then you can actually use the tools as an engineer, and you can actually become an ML engineer quite easily if you have the right tools. And then finally, you have people who consume the outputs of those systems. You need to sort of understand statistics a little bit, but you don't have to be an expert, and you can plug them right into products.
Very nice. So you share a very large number, and you give an interesting way of calculating that order of magnitude, but it's still about ranking, which seems to be very about ranking,
yeah.
Which seems to be a core to having a rank feed. Can you tell us about other newer applications at Facebook of AI that you might be able to share with us?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've been talking about ML at Facebook for a while, and the main piece of the talk always was feed ranking, right? That's because it's the thing that made people the most unhappy, but also maybe the most happy, right? And the funny thing is that now there are hundreds and hundreds of applications that maybe are not obvious. So I'll give you a few. One that is very close to my heart is machine translation. So we serve over 6 billion translated impressions on Facebook feed every single day, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. And I need to share a story. I'll try to make it short. We once had a person come and deliver a handwritten letter to our office complaining that Facebook translation wasn't working anymore for them, and that they had restarted their phone and it was still not working. And it turns out this person had been stationed in Germany with the military a long time ago, actually. Now it was a retired person. And now he's like an organ grinder in Redwood City, as it happens. And he came to deliver this handwritten letter, which is like, I have all these friends in Germany that still post in German, and my German isn't good enough to understand all they say, and like, you've taken away this feature. I'm pretty upset. So we actually, he left a phone number, so we call him. And then we invited him to see how our systems work, and then of course we checked. And we sometimes run experiments to know, what the benefit of a product is, what you do as you do in biology. You just cut the muscle, right? Just see what the muscle does, right? So here, we saw that by removing translation, we get people to come and deliver a handwritten letter and complain about it. Okay, so that's kind of like an interesting one, right? And another one that I think is quite cool is, one of the things that I'm passionate about is how AI can augment people's abilities and sometimes help people that have accessibility disadvantages, right? So we worked on this idea of helping, now it's going to sound super simple, but when we worked on it, it was actually not that simple, which is if you're blind and you're browsing newsfeed, given the increase in visual content, whether videos or images, it can become extremely boring, right? Because it's going to be like, post by Esteban yesterday, 4:55 p.m., silence. You're like, okay, well, that's not great. So we've been working on improving computer vision and then text-to-speech to have, a version of Facebook for the blind that actually provides as idiomatic and descriptive an image, a description of the image as possible, right? And now because we can, we can recognize your friends on your photos, right? We can actually read out loud, and you can say, oh, this is Esteban posing with our common friend Carlos, and there's a barbecue in the background, and then I can get like all upset and jealous because they didn't invite me. But at least it's a much more sort of immersive experience. And then another one that is really interesting is actually an illustration of what happens when you build tools that help pretty much anybody in the company use ML in one way or another. We have a team called Social Good, and that team was paying attention to something that was going on in India, which is that people were using Facebook to solicit blood donations. And they sort of studied it, right? And the volume was pretty big, right? But they had the instinct that this was completely inefficient because all you saw was yet another random, text-only post that was requesting, blood donations. It maybe wasn't providing all the information needed. So using a natural language processing service that we have running, they basically quite easily trained a model to recognize when a post was actually requesting for a blood donation. And then what they did is they then sort of parsed the content of it to try to understand, well, what hospital is this for? Is a phone number provided, and so on. And then they turned that into an actual post that's a blood donation product that is properly formatted, that has a map where you can sort of say, what hospital is this for? Because time is of the essence, right? If you're going to take too long to get there, it's not useful anymore, right? And then they built an entire product around that, where then they build the counterpart of it, which helped people register to be a blood donor, right? And I think to date, there's over 30 million registered blood donors in India, which is a pretty insane figure. So these are examples of cool applications. I'll mention one more because I think it's really cool. I don't know if anyone has seen the new 3D photos product that I see some heads nodding, thank you. It's always good to know that someone actually has used the product. So the idea here is super simple. It's a little bit like think about the depth camera that Apple put together where they use two cameras with two different focal lenses, and with that information they try to reconstruct the depth map of an image. So here the idea is you don't need that. You just start with a single image. And then you actually train an AI to learn the depth map. And then once you've done that, you can actually render the photo. It's not exactly 3D, obviously, because you don't have all the information. But it turns out that if you just blur the right amount of space that's occluded, the different sort of distances, and of course you move planes relative to each other in the right way, it just works, right? And especially it works really great if people don't know computational photography. Then they just look at it and they go like, oh, wow, right? If you know computational photography, then you know that it's not possible. You're trying to sort of break it, right? But that's kind of like a fun, that was sort of another application of AI. I could probably spend hours going through fun examples.
I think that's a very interesting one because it starts talking about essentially playing with images, and in some sense you could think of it as like augmented reality. Can you tell us a little bit about how AI efforts are applied into VR at Facebook?
Oh yeah. So actually, there's one that I could also talk about for a long time because it's quite fun. So one of the challenges in virtual reality is presence, and the uncanny valley. So if I'm let's say in Germany visiting my parents-in-law, and I want to have a conversation with you, Esteban, and we decide to put our VR headsets on, and we're like maybe in some nice environment of our choice, right? The question is, how do I represent you in VR, and how do I represent myself in VR so that we look at each other and we feel like we recognize and can relate to the other person, right? And that includes, of course, me being able to immediately feel that this is you, but also emotions and something as silly as lip synchronization is hard, right? And so the product team did the following, right? For this product we call social VR, which is a little bit like our playground for experimenting with things you could do in virtual reality. So they said, well, this is actually pretty easy. We're just going to build an avatar editor. So when I talked about the uncanny valley, if I try to reproduce you in a photographically realistic manner, today we fail at that. It's extremely hard, right? So that problem is not solved, so you shouldn't even try. Because if you try to come close to that, it's going to be very obvious how much we suck at it, and it's just going to be a really bad experience. So the solution, from good old computer games is like, well, make it obviously non-photorealistic, so you stay on the right side on the correct side of the uncanny valley. So then it's like, okay, so let's just build an avatar editor, right? And the challenge there is that for VR, this being a pretty rich and high-resolution world with sort of full 3D, the number, if you really want to be able to allow people to create avatars of themselves that look realistic enough and that they enjoy, the number of parameters you need to tune is crazy. It's actually very big. And it turns out that if you give people a challenge, create an avatar of yourself, they'll sort of struggle, right? Because the choice space is just too big. So what the team did is they said, well, let's just generate a data set that maps from people's photographs to avatars that some artists, some experts will create. Of course, this process doesn't scale, right? You can do only a few of those, and then you need to train an AI that can do that for you, right? So what the AI is doing is, in a parameter space that has thousands of parameters, map that to a cool avatar that you look at and you're like, yeah, I like this, right? Or even reduce it, to just a few choices, right? That's a pretty cool, crazy application that I like, and there was like a lot of details that went into there, like going from speech recognition to movement of lips that looks realistic and so on. And it comes with a bunch of other challenges that I might tell you about later.
Actually, that's a very good segue because so far I hear a lot of very interesting product applications. I do not hear challenges. So can you tell us what are some of the bigger challenges that Facebook is facing and that we're trying to tackle with AI?
This doesn't look staged at all. I think I'm going to talk about a couple of challenges. So the two challenges I want to talk about are, on the one hand, just to call out the elephant in the room, integrity challenges, like how do you do content moderation at scale, right? When you have things like interference in elections, but also other problems like bullying or hate speech on our platform, right? And actually, let's start with this one, and then after that, I'll tell you a little bit about concerns of algorithmic fairness. So on integrity, here's the thing. The analogy that I like to give is the radio, right? So obviously the radio was a transformative medium, right? It created a completely new way of disseminating and consuming information, which of course was problematic in that it was sometimes abused, obviously. But the interesting thing is that there was a physical limit, right? And the physical limit was the electromagnetic spectrum that was available. So you could only have like a certain number of radio stations. So from a scalability point of view, there were ways in which you could address, curating the content of what was sort of shared on the radio, right? But today, right, with the technology that many of you have helped create, we've sort of changed physics, right? So there's no longer a limit to that, spectrum, right? You can pack in as many radio stations as you want. And so I want to share one figure with you guys. So the number of messages that are shared on the family of Facebook apps every day is 100 billion messages every single day. It's a lot of messages. So imagine that a human who was trying to look for either policy violating or illegal or harmful content, imagine that they could review 100 pieces of content every day. It actually doesn't matter, just the order of magnitude is going to be right. Well, you need the combined population of the Americas, right? Everybody working on content moderation to be able to sort of go through that volume. So it's pretty obvious that you need to scale that using AI. And that, it turns out, is an extremely difficult problem for a long list of reasons. On election integrity specifically, I actually have some cheat sheet here with some stats. Just in these midterms, we actually use a combination of AI and humans to remove 117,000 spammy accounts and 45,000 accounts that were actually clearly engaged in voter suppression. And we wouldn't have been able to find them all just with human reviews, right? So often what you do in these difficult cases is that you build hybrid systems where AI and humans work together. And the way to think about this is that humans are information processing queues, right? So you have policies, you have reviewing guidelines, right? And then humans are, trained to review content and take different actions. But of course, think about every human being like an infinite queue of content that you're going to process. The biggest challenge here is the priority, right? Like, is that queue ordered in the right way? Or am I spending most of my time reviewing stuff that's trivially okay and actually not spending any time reviewing the stuff that's most important? So where the AI comes in is essentially in dynamically reprioritizing that queue to make sure that at the top of the queue you have the most important stuff, right? I'm going to take a breath before I talk about fairness, or maybe you want to ask me any other.
So I like the analogy of thinking of all of us being information processing queues, because suddenly the view of AI started being a lot more collaborative with what we do, as opposed to a lot more complementary, sorry. So are there other examples that you can think of where we are using AI to augment people's capacities?
Yes, I told you about AI to help blind people. Another project that is quite interesting is we have a couple of researchers looking at dyslexia. And the way they're looking at the problem is trying to approach it almost like a translation problem. Like, imagine, trying to train a model to go from the English a dyslexic person would write to English. That's another cool example.
That's very nice. So I have a few more questions here. And so I'm going to do one that I think is the most speculative of all. So let me give it a go. So you've been working and being at the forefront of essentially applied machine learning for over a decade now. Where do you see the most promise for AI in, let's say, the future to come? To give a time span.
I wonder whether anyone in the room hates that question as much as I do. So I think one of the things that excited me the most about stuff you can do with AI is actually not work that we're doing at Facebook. It's work that John Platt, who's at Google now, but used to be at Microsoft Research for a long time, is doing. And what he's doing is he's trying to help use AI. Again, this is a beautiful collaboration between AI and humans and scientists to make nuclear fusion work. And the interesting application there is that I'm not an expert, so if there's any expert in nuclear fusion in the room, you can come punch me or you can set the record straight. But this is my understanding, is that this is similar to the avatar tuning problem in a way, in that when you're trying to run experiments in an experimental nuclear fusion reactor, you have, again, thousands of parameters to tune, right? Some of them are time parameters, some of them are energy parameters. And this is a needle in a haystack problem, of course. And if you're a human, you're a scientist, you're going to use all of your limited understanding of the theory, but also your experience, right? In trying to decide what is the next set of experiments you're going to run. And obviously, the challenge here is that there aren't that many nuclear fusion reactors out there, and it takes time to run an experiment. So figuring out which one to run is kind of important. And so I think the name of the algorithm is the optometrist algorithm or something like that, where what they do is they use an AI to sort of crunch through all of the data known and recorded of experiments that have been run in the past, and then sort of proposing to the scientists, like, here's 2 alternative configurations you could try. And often the value is that some of these suggestions are sometimes a bit crazy. But that's why you have the human, right? And I think the name comes from you just try like different corrections in a way, right? And you say, like, is this one better than that other one? Like, which one do you want to run, right? And apparently this has made material impact. Like, they've managed through this work to run the experiments that have sustained proper stable plasma for the longest time, which again turns out to be a tiny amount of time in the grand scheme of things. So we're, I don't know how close we are to actually solving this, but the general idea when you zoom out, that you can use AI for what it's good at, which is consuming any arbitrary amount of data. But then for anyone who's read Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, all right, you should read it. Humans are terrible at making decisions, right? I'm also reading The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. So if anyone hasn't read that, you should read it too. These 2 books say the same thing, which is that humans are terrible at making decisions because we have so many biases, right? Even like recency bias is such a terrible one, right? Like whatever I read this morning is going to influence my decisions this afternoon. So just use AI for what it's good at, right? It doesn't care whether it had breakfast or not, or what its blood sugar level might be, or what it read last night in the news. It doesn't care, right? And then use humans for what we're good at, which is like insane, lateral thinking, imagination, obviously, and abstract thought, and obviously common sense, which AI doesn't really have yet. I probably have a long list of other things that I'm excited about, but I feel like I might be overextending myself a little bit in my answers.
Okay. So I think before we go to questions from all of you, I want to go back to that comment about fairness and bias that you have mentioned. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
Does anyone in the audience work on algorithmic fairness? Okay, one person. And some people maybe work on it, or maybe have realized that it's very hard. Anyway, so happy to chat afterwards with you guys. This is an area that I'm very new to, so a disclaimer. But where I've come to the logical conclusion that this is probably the most important thing for me to be spending my time on. And the reason is precisely the fact that 1 in 4 engineers at Facebook use the AI platform we've built, right? And so to me, the next logical question after 6 years of working on this was, well, what is our biggest blind spot? And I think the biggest blind spot was, well, we have all these algorithms that are making consequential decisions. And these decisions of consequence either inflict punishment. Most of the time, they might get it right. The punishment might be, well, this piece of content shouldn't be on the site, so let's remove it. And I say the site where I should be saying the app or whatever, right? But it's just an old word. But they also distribute value, right? So we have a jobs product that created 250,000 sort of matchings between job listings and applicants in the last half of last year. And I think this year, it's going to be several times that number, right? And of course, the problem there is that you have an AI that's helping recommend local job listings to potential applicants. So you're distributing scarce resources, right? And this is not only a Facebook or a Facebook family of apps problem. This is going to be a universal problem, right? AI is going to be making consequential decisions in criminal justice, right? Many people are probably familiar with the ProPublica study of the use of algorithms to decide sort of jail or bail, you know? In healthcare, in education, in agriculture, just everywhere, right? So looking at that, I just became obsessed with the idea that we need to understand whether the algorithms making those decisions are fair. And of course, there's a huge amount of literature and centuries-old work on human fairness, right? And this is why we have a lot of checks and balances for humans who make decisions. But again, we're changing the laws of physics here again too, right? With humans, it takes time for humans to make decisions. There are processes, right? And like the number of decisions made per day that are consequential is some number. But now when you deploy AI universally and you let AI make those decisions, you're looking at many, many orders of magnitude more decisions made per day. So this is a huge deal. So being a tools person, I thought this is easy, right? I mean, we put the entire company on a set of tools, so we're just going to build some tools for algorithmic fairness. So I started to study the literature. And then there was one inconvenient thing, which is that there isn't one measure of algorithmic fairness from a mathematical point of view, right? Where like if you have an algorithm and you say, hey, make predictions, right? Or make decisions on this data set. And then let's just assume that the data set is well-balanced, representative. Let's just make, imagine you have like a ground truth you can rely on, all these things. There isn't one equation. So that's a little bit annoying. But then I'm like, that doesn't matter, right? Like how many are they? It's like, well, maybe a dozen, like reasonable measures of algorithmic fairness. And there's another inconvenience, which is that if you satisfy some of them, then you can prove that you can't satisfy some of the other ones. That's also a little bit annoying, but that's fine. Let's just build them all in the tool, which is what my initial reaction was, right? And to make this very concrete, we looked at the jobs product. And we said, well, are we creating equal economic empowerment for everybody? And everybody, we said, well, what are two obvious sensitive dimensions you could look at when you think about jobs? Well, you can look at gender and you can look at age. So, we started very simple. We said, well, let's just take people over and under 40 years old, and then let's binarize gender and look at male and female. And then let's look in these 4 buckets. Are the algorithms equally accurate? Are they biased in the sense that they might be, ranking sort of more interesting opportunities higher for any of these groups than another in a way that's unfair? And then, of course, the unfair part is tricky because I just told you that mathematically it's complicated. But then I felt like, this is fine. We build the tool. We give the tool to the product team. The product team will figure out which of the metrics to use depending on their product context, and we're done. And so I thought we were on a path to democratize fairness across all AI at Facebook, and I'm like, this is going to be awesome. Until I came across the problem of fairness in content moderation. So let's take clickbait or hate speech as 2 examples, right? Like if you wanted to remove that sort of content from Facebook. Then you realize that this is not primarily an AI problem. It's just not. And I'll explain why. So the first question we came across is, well, fairness from whose perspective, right? Fairness from the perspective of the content producer, right? And if I'm moderating, misinformation, for example, the publisher, right, is going to be the content producer. Or fairness from the point of view of the people who are consuming the information. The second question is, well, what sensitive groups should I be looking at? If you're in the US and it's midterms, it's obviously political ideology is going to be like one of the big ones. But is there a universal agreement that this is the most important sensitive group to look at? Or should you be looking at, ethnic affinity? Should you be looking at like economic class? Like should you be looking at other things too? But then what really, really hit me so hard, like a ton of bricks, was, well, what definition of fairness should I be using? Like, and to oversimplify, and for the experts, I apologize. Should I be looking at things like equal treatment? Or should I try to be equalizing impact? And the distinction between the two is, even when my treatment is equal, in the sense that there is nothing in my code that treats any group differently than any other, the impact might still be very different, right? One trivial example is maybe the prevalence of content that is inappropriate might be much higher for one group than another, for example. And then as a result, if I apply an equal treatment filtering system, the volume of stuff I'm going to take down is going to be much bigger for that group, right? And then the question is that fair or not? And the answer is like, it depends. And so that's when I realized this is not primarily an AI problem. So what we did is we pressed the pause button and we said, all right, what we need here is we need something like a fairness assessment framework. We need to basically look at the entire problem, all the way from what justifies what we're trying to do. Is it the law? Is it our community standards? Is it what people expect us to do, right? And then you need to look at the policies that are written that, permit us to remove stuff, those can actually already introduce unfairness. Because maybe not all groups would agree that a specific definition of harmful content is harmful, right? And this is very true of things like, hate speech, for example, right? Like different people have different sensitivity levels. And then you get to I'm going to need humans to review this, right? Remember the infinite queues. And then it's what guidelines do we write for this? And if I write a guideline where I say, here's the 50 words that are, the most clear examples of hate speech. Well, maybe one group uses them a lot more than another, and maybe for one group, depending on the context, it's actually not hate speech. And so if you're not careful, you're actually being unfair just there too. And the list goes on, right? So I think what you need to do here is you need to look at things like intent and things like auditability. And obviously, the tools will be a part of it, but the tools in themselves cannot solve the problem. So this is one of the most fascinating things that I've worked on in a while, and I feel terrified because I'm obviously not an expert. I didn't study social sciences. I wish I had, but I'm trying to catch up as fast as I can.
So related to that, do you work with policymakers or with external experts, agencies when dealing with or thinking about this type of challenges that are not only about AI, but actually are very relevant to the use of AI at Facebook?
Yeah, 100%. So there's a long list of think tanks and of public interest groups, and actually some of our fellow companies. One forum I particularly like is the Partnership on AI, of which we're a founding member, and I happen to now be on the board. And other companies that are also on the board, include Alphabet, so Google and DeepMind are represented, and Amazon and IBM and Apple. But on the same board we have the ACLU, we have the MacArthur Foundation, and so we get together regularly and we actually talk about these problems. And it is incredibly challenging on the one hand, but also incredibly stimulating. And then I'm personally also very engaged with academic experts on the field.
Okay.
And there still isn't one definition of fairness.
There's still no one definition? No. Are you voting?
No.
So this is an interesting question. How do you deal with misinterpreting foreign language communications? And do we need to improve our translations in order to reduce hate speech? And so let me rephrase the question. Is there any relationship between our translation systems or misinterpreting someone speaking a foreign language with hate speech itself that you can comment on?
Yeah, it's actually an extremely difficult problem. Sometimes when I give talks, I like to put up a slide that has two very blurred photos, so you cannot recognize what's on them. And then on top of each photo, there's a sentence. In one of the slides, it says, look at that pig. And on the other side, it says, I'm going to beat the crap out of you. And so the question there would be, well, is this violent speech or is this hate speech? Like, should you remove it or not? And then I press next, and then the photos become unblurred. And then under look at that pig, you have a beautiful picture of a baby pig with a bow, right? So it's pretty clear that now that you have the context, it's not hate speech. And I'm going to beat the crap out of you. You have two people just playing basketball in front of their, in front of their garage, right? So it's like, okay, for most people, that'd be probably okay, right? And so it's not only a language-specific, problem. It's actually just a context-specific question, right? So in order to solve that, you'd have to actually have an AI that both understands what's on the image and that also understands what's being said. There's some work on machine translation that I'm optimistic about, and you can go look it up on unsupervised machine translation. That is actually showing amazing results for low-resource languages, right? So when you're trying to figure out whether you have hate speech in the top 5 languages, I think that can be addressed because the amount of data you have is going to be pretty large. But when you get into the tail, once you're like in the 200th or 300th language, it becomes extremely hard. And it's just not realistic, that you're going to get enough sort of properly labeled data. And so the way to try and solve this is to use techniques that don't require labeled data, right? And for those of you who have worked on natural language processing, one of the most promising approaches right now is to find correspondences between word embeddings in different languages, right? And so if you can find affine transformations from one to the other, you can actually at least infer the relation between words, even in a language where you have no labels, just based on the relation between words in a language for which you have labeled data. And so we're making quite a bit of progress in using that. But just to be extremely clear and set expectations, right? This is a problem that, in my opinion, is going to remain unsolved for a while, just because understanding context is going to remain hard for a while.
Oh, that makes my next question a little bit tricky, which is, roughly, how do you think chatbots or conversational agents can help users improve their interactions in the platform? And when do you think that's going to be available, or what is missing in order to be able to make this type of more conversational agents available at large?
So first an observation. I think conversational agents suck today. Like I think they're terrible, and I think they're terrible for a number of reasons. One, again, context. They're not good at context at all. Second, they're not good at multi-threading. Like you can have several parallel conversations with a human, and they'll very quickly figure out which one you're referring to. Chatbots are not there yet. And then the third one is a very human-centric one, right? Think about the following experience. You meet someone new at a bar or at a restaurant or at a cafe, right? And within minutes, you have your human inference system working extremely hard to try and figure out tons and tons of attributes about that person. And half an hour into the conversation, the amount of information that is transmitted, with the same sentence, with the same 3 words, has all of a sudden increased a lot. Like you have some amazing channel encoding, if you will, right? That's not true with today's chatbots, right? You're there and you're like, where are my bits of information, right? It's extremely frustrating, right? And it's like, don't ask me that question again. I already told you, right? So I think some of those are solvable, but it's going to take time. Now, the things that I'm excited about where I think chatbots can help. The first one is, I don't know any interface that makes privacy easy to understand for people. And if you know one, please let me know, because you always have like this tiny fine print that no one reads. I don't read it. I just rely on common sense. I'm like, there can't be anything crazy in here, right? But if you had an agent that understood you and to whom you could have a dialogue and say like, hey, I'm about to press this thing. What does this mean, right? And you could get sort of like an answer that was reasonable, right? If there could be like a much better interface to things like privacy controls, that'd be pretty awesome. And then I was talking to someone this morning about this idea that when you're working on AI, you of course want to train the fanciest and most spectacular model possible to do the most difficult thing. But by doing that, you're forgetting to think about the millions of applications you could be doing with simple AI, right? And the way I like to think about it is like the Soyuz example, right? Like today, to go to the space station, you use technology that is many decades old, right? It just works, right? So you could actually build chatbots that are pretty simple, that help people like, plumbers or electricians not lose business opportunities because they're a one-person army. They're either like at a construction site, and we've been remodeling our house for a while, and I don't recommend it. Don't do it. And I see it, right? Like often, I have to call our electrician, and like they're actually doing work, so they can't pick up the call. But then other times it's going to be, someone wanting, business with them, and sure, you can have an answering machine and stuff like that. But if you had something as simple as, assistance to help small businesses, interface with people, and that would be like the other way around, as I think like many people are thinking about it, right? People are thinking, oh, my assistant as a person, can call the business, right? And seem like they're, a natural person. Like, no, maybe just turn it on its head, right? Like have assistants actually help businesses, because defining the schema there is going to be a lot easier. And if you've ever called Comcast, and unfortunately you probably have, once you're like at the 27th level of depth in the menu, right? Your moral system probably has evolved by that point, right? And like you're not yourself anymore, right? So I think trying to solve problems like that, these problems are relatively well defined. You can get a lot of training data. You might not need the fanciest AI. You just need like a lot of good product sense, and then maybe some rule-based systems. Nothing wrong with that. And I'm okay if you code me with this. And then a bit of AI to solve some of the difficult bits and pieces.
All right. So I have an interesting potential product. So hear me out. So 200 trillion inferences per day. That's roughly 100,000 per user on average. So this potentially could yield a lot of insights for the users themselves. So what would you think about enabling users to see to learn about themselves through the inferences that we are able to make?
I think from a technology point of view, I think it's a pretty awesome idea. The thing that gives me pause is that when I've seen work done, not only at Facebook, but I also, of course, in the ML academic world, you never cease to be a researcher, right? And so you always meet at conferences with your peers that work at many other companies. And so I've seen experiments done at other companies of trying to build much richer interfaces that actually explain to people why are you seeing this piece of content and enable that sort of interaction. And for some reason, they've never gone well. And I don't know if it's because just the complexity of the interface just explodes, right? And people get confused. And you're not asking me about giving people controls. You're asking me about just being able to sort of consume, right, a representation. My other concern from a design or from a product point of view is that I think for most people that view is going to be incomplete, inevitably, right? And I don't know how people are going to react, right? And then finally, I feel like this could become a very emotional thing. So if I had anyone work on that, it wouldn't be an AI person, actually. It would be someone who really understands human-computer interactions and things like that. But I think the idea is pretty awesome from a technology point of view.
So do you know the work of Carl Friedson on active inference?
No.
I'm going to pass on that one.
But keep it to hand, because yes, then I can go look it up.
All right. I don't have a next one prepared. Interesting. So what is Facebook doing to encourage or foster diversity in data science and AI disciplines?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. So the first thing I'll say is that on the avatar creation AI that I told you about, the team that built the first version was not a diverse team, and as a result, the tool didn't work for everyone. And there were like specific types of people for whom it didn't work, right? And that was one of those examples where we realized that if we had people, with the traits for whom it didn't work on the team, we would have caught it immediately. So there's no overstating the importance of having diversity in AI teams. And is anyone familiar with Joy Buolamwini and her work? She's at MIT, and she has this amazing TED Talk where she uses a face recognition piece of software off the shelf that recognizes basic things like gender and basic emotions. And she's a black researcher, and she stands in front of the camera and it doesn't work, right? And she has a colleague that for whom it works, right? And then Joy does this thing where she pulls a white mask, puts it on her face, and then all of a sudden the tool works, right? It's a very, very impactful example. What we're doing is at many levels. I mean, obviously, I think about diversity in two different ways. One is obviously recruiting and making sure that we get people who are diverse, into the teams. But I think a very different one is once you have a team and you're operating, you need to make extremely clear and that you need to make sure that everybody has a voice in a team, right? Because it's not good having diversity if then the conversation is dominated by a few people, by a subgroup. And on recruiting, it's hard. I mean, I think the biggest thing we can do altogether is just make sure that a more diverse group of people actually has access to the education required to work at a place like Facebook, right? And I mean, I know that pretty much every company I know of is engaged in things like that. We try to engage very actively with diverse groups in AI. I happen to be on the organizing committee of this conference that used to be called NIPS, Neural Information Processing Systems, and now it's been renamed to NeurIPS. I mean, the only thing that has changed is the acronym, because it was pretty obviously offensive, although it sort of stayed like that for many years. I think it's a good thing that we've changed it. And we actually have dedicated workshops in that conference to try and support and encourage AI in different subgroups. So this is not a complete list, but we have a Blacks in AI workshop. We have a Women in AI workshop. We have a Latino and Latina workshop, for example, at the conference. And by the way, this is something that I'm doing as a community service. I'm not doing this as as my core job at Facebook. I'm doing this as a member of the organizing committee for the NeurIPS conference. And for those who don't know, it's arguably the top 2 or maybe 3 conferences in AI and ML every year.
All right. Well, I guess we're out of time. And
Thank
so
you.